Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm glad that the previous speakers already talked about climate change. I'm absolutely convinced that climate change is the biggest problem we need to solve. And it has to be looked at from different perspectives, from all perspectives. I've been working in Africa for the last 20 years. And my experience doing research in the continent showed me that if we are going to find solutions to climate change, we will have to look at biodiversity, and we will have to look at how the land is used to produce food. We need to do that. We need to find solutions for the problems and also take into account farmers' livelihoods. We cannot affect farmers' livelihood in places in the world that have fewer resources than we do. Farmers' livelihoods are closely linked to the quality of the land. So land degradation is a problem. I'm going to show you today a little bit of our research and engagement with farmers in Africa in the next few minutes. So the question I'm going to explore during the talk is, what can science do to support land restoration? One of the speakers mentioned before carbon offset, and land restoration is one of the biggest opportunities we have to offset climate change, to offset greenhouse gas emissions, because the land is the biggest store of carbon we have at the moment, either in the soil or on the background biomass. So I'm going to use these three questions to tell you about our research. I'm going to tell you why we do this work and where. I'm going to tell you what we were looking for and what we found. And finally, what we learned from the research. So first about Africa. Why Africa? This has been my research for the last 20 years, like I said before. And my question in general is how we can produce more food with local resources and low emissions. It is a question that's specific to Africa, but if you think about it, it should apply everywhere in the world. So why Africa? Africa is more globalized, and it's actually the continent that is growing fastest in all dimensions, also economically. There is an increase in demand for food. There is land in Africa to be cultivated, but they have a couple of problems. One of the problems is land use change. Because the population grows fast, there is also demand for land. And at the same time, there is a loss of forest. When we lose forest, we lose that opportunity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And that is a problem that causes degradation. Most African countries have committed to the Paris Agreement to mitigate climate change. And this I see it as an opportunity for farmers to engage in mitigation and at the same time improve their livelihoods. About 10, 15 years ago, I was working on how we can protect forests for many reasons: biodiversity, carbon, water. There are so many services that we get from our forest. And some of you probably already spotted, this is a picture that was taken from a little plane flying over a very threatened forest in Kenya. And some of you have already spotted these cows. And this is a problem of forests in many places in the world. And it is a problem that you find cows inside a forest, because when you have cows inside a forest, they will chew on the seedlings and the forest wouldn't regenerate. When you have a patch like this inside a forest, the grass is of better quality. So it attracts more the farmers to feed their animals, and patches become bigger and bigger and bigger, and the process continues. So there are a lot of efforts to improve policies and create incentives to stop this, to stop deforestation, to stop degradation. But I'm convinced, and there is evidence that shows that solutions to forest degradation and to protect this stock of carbon and the possibility of remove CO2 from the atmosphere the solutions to that problem are to be found outside the forest. Research from our team showed that when you intensify cattle farms in this sort of environment, we reduce a disturbance caused by firewood extraction. So farmers who don't have access to energy, to alternative renewable or to fossil fuel energy as we do, they will use firewood. So intensifying farms reduce the disturbance due to firewood extraction, but it also reduces the disturbance due to grazing. So intensifying production, farming, could potentially reduce the pressure from the forest. And this evidence motivated me to start looking into grassland degradation. If we improve the amount and quality of the grasslands to feed livestock, are we going to keep livestock outside the forest? Are we going to reduce the emissions from livestock production at the same time? When we have a lot of animals in a piece of land, this is what you get. Overgrazing that together with big storms will lead to bare soil and to erosion. When the land is in this condition, it doesn't sequester carbon anymore. It doesn't take out CO2 from the atmosphere. This is a photograph I took in Kenya, and next door, we had this patch of land. If it's fenced and you control grazing, the land can be productive. Why is the land degradation a problem? So this is a study done globally that shows that if we have land degradation, and here what you see in the picture is the reddish colors show changes in human population in land that is degrading, and in blue you have changes of population in pieces of land that are improving. When we have, and you see a lot of these pink and reddish colors in the world, when you have land that is degrading, every investment on improving livelihoods, reducing poverty, are wasted because you're just throwing away money without helping rural populations to improve their livelihoods. So it is important to address land degradation for that reason, so that we actually deliver development in the part of the world that are needed. So this is the motivation why we started looking into land restoration, and the motivation why we are looking at grazing systems in Africa. So a couple of years ago, we obtained this project from the Global Challenge Research Fund from UKRI, from the UK Research Council, to look at how we could restore degraded landscape, focusing on grazing lands. And the idea behind was to bring together the perspective from different disciplines, from soil science, from agriculture, from ecology, and also from the social sciences, to understand how we could bring an ecosystem that is degraded, where you see signs of degradation, where grasslands are unproductive, they produce little biomass, there is a lot of bare soil and signs of erosion, how we could bring it back towards the left of the slide to a productive ecosystem that was stable, where there were no signs of erosion and there were no signs of bare soil. And our hypothesis was, this is the non-equilibrium hypothesis, non-equilibrium hypothesis, that we could bring back a degrading landscape to a space of equilibrium by exploiting the diversity, the local diversity. But at the same time, remember, these are managed ecosystems where there are people with animals and grazing and so on. At the same time, we need to address what are the social determinants that are going to push this process from the right to the left. Land rights and tenure and alternative models. So what we did is, we did investigate soils, we investigated the plants, but we also spoke to the farmers to see what was that space that will help us identify the options to move things from the right to the left. So the work was a combination of experiments and surveys, because we were looking for those metrics, these practical metrics that could be used together with the communities to identify which species could be used in these bare soils to get them back into productivity. What were we looking for and what we found? I'd like to show you, because I have already spoken a lot, I would like to show you a video from our research site. And what we did is to ask a Kenyan filmmaker to go and ask farmers, what was the problem and what could be the solution? And the same question, we were not there, it was just a Kenyan filmmaker. The same question was asked to us, to the researchers. What's the problem and what could be the solutions? And I'd like to show you a summary of that.
When I was still young, we used to see what a good number of flock of animals, very many. One could even have more than even 100, because there was plenty of grass. So there was plenty of pasture where we could also graze. And there were no other challenges that time.
Hiyo miaka ya 80s, 90, early 90s. Mahali kama pale nyuma ilikuwa busi. Na kuna hii nyasi ya modhino. Hiyo nyasi mahali hiko inakuanga mingi sana. Sasa hiyo ilikuwa inatusaidia na ng'ombe. Hata mbuzi wanapenda hiyo modhino sana.
If you compare today and the past, the type of grass which we used to have before are not there to nowadays. Why? Some other weeds have also come up and also even interfere with them. So it is now changing.
The problem is that these communities have many cows, and when they have many cows, they sometimes overgraze the fields, and when this process continues for a long time, it can lead to very poor quality, and in extreme cases you can get bare soil. When we have bare soil, grass doesn't grow and the cows don't have anything to eat, so we enter into a cycle, a vicious cycle of degradation that doesn't benefit the ecosystem, it doesn't benefit the community.
The purpose of this project is essentially to test short-term effectiveness of grassland restoration approaches. Then the specific objective is to see whether this grassland restoration can be adopted by the farmers as a commercial activity to support their livelihoods.
And so we've set up experiments in some parts of Kenya to look at how we use different vegetation species mixes to restore soils. And we also have a large monitoring program looking at on-farm soil condition and vegetation. Basically, what we are doing is use soil inoculum and manure, because they are livestock keepers, they have adequate manure. This way we are running the experiment. We have two levels. We are testing till and no till. One is we'll apply manure as a treatment. Two, we'll apply soil inoculum as a treatment. Three, we'll apply a combination of soil inoculum and manure. Then four, we'll have a control plot upon which we will not apply any of the treatments.
What science can do is it can provide knowledge or evidence about scientific ways of actually kick-starting that process.
So the local communities have indigenous technical knowledge. So we like to gel research and indigenous technical knowledge to help us become with better outcomes.
Sasa vile tuliendelea sasa kufuka ng'ombe, tukaenda sasa mahali penye ng'ombe sasa walikuwa wanalalia. Ikishalalia kama tuseme miezi 3, unapata sasa nyasi yenye inakuja ni ile mzuri, hata ng'ombe ikikula inaweza dumu for long.
Ukiangalia huku ni mahali ng'ombe alikuwa ameweka kinyesi.
Kwa hivyo ukiangalia hizi nyasi si sawa na mahali ng'ombe hawachalala.
I think we can learn a lot from farmers. They understand how soils are degrading, and they also know which plant species grow well in their particular situation.
So if we want to persuade them to take up these methods, we have to demonstrate that it actually works. So it's important that the kind of methods that we propose are actually compatible with what the farmers can do.
Farmers can conserve grassland by protecting the grazing area, by putting additive like compost manure, which is easily available. If you have the capacity, you need to do the paddocking. The other recommendation which I also have, let us also do the destocking of the animals.
Kwa upande wetu kama vijana, ni jukumu letu kuchunga mahali kuna erosion, kwa sababu mchanga ikishabebwa na maji yote litapoteza faida zenye kwa mchanga. Sasa ile itabaki ile iko na rocks. Sasa hiyo haitasaidia kuwa na nyasi nzuri.
By allowing farmers to be partners in this research project, we are empowering them, we are partnering with them to move every step together with them. They have the local conditions, they have the farms, they have the grasslands, they have the livestock. So all research that we do should be based or have bearing on the local conditions and the farmer practice, such that they can appreciate what we are doing and we can measure meaningful outcomes.
Thank you very much. For me, it was very important to hear how the farmers saw the problems, and also to listen to me and myself and my colleagues and contrast the two perspectives, because we did go and sample the plots that were in equilibrium and those plots that were degraded. And I'm going to show you a selection of what we found, and I'm going to show you a selection of the aggregated perspective from the farmers. Well, we selected a number of measures that will describe the health of the soil. Here, what you see is grassland roots, and we find a trend to reduce the production of roots when the soils degrade, which is a sign of the quality of the life of that soil. We did not find any sign that these roots were not growing because the land was compacted. Another thing we found is a trend for microbial carbon and nitrogen in those soils to go down. And we know that when microbial activity in a soil goes down, it's because the soil is degrading. It's not a good sign. It's a sign that probably biodiversity of that soil below ground biodiversity has been affected. So these were worrying things for us. But these biological parameters were not related to the amount of carbon or nitrogen that was stored in the soil. So what we see is a trend in one of the sides to decrease, for carbon to decrease with depth, but on the other side was increasing with depth. So we couldn't conclude that the soils that we had selected as degraded were actually had their soil chemical properties affected. We did see something on the biological part and not much on the chemical part. When we asked the farmers what they thought about the grassland, how would you rate your grassland? And what you can see here is degraded transition equilibriums, where the plots that we labeled as degraded transition and equilibrium. And what you see that most farmers thought that no matter what label we put to the plot, the soils were average or good. When we asked them about the pasture quality on our degraded transition and equilibrium, remember that we said that it was going to be degraded when there was little biomass, was a lot of bare soil and signs of erosion. Farmers thought that their plots were average or good. have you noticed erosion in your land? Most of them had noticed erosion, but that didn't link to the land being degrading or losing quality. We did take samples from those soils and analyze the feed quality. We saw no difference in quality between the degrading plot and the plot that was in good condition. And we did not see any difference in the number of species between the degrading plot and the plot that was in good condition. We did see, though, a change in the type of species. And this is what the farmers talk about. And this was actually very interesting for us, because farmers talk about weeds. So some of the plants of the grasslands that are counting into the diversity are considered weeds. And what we learned from this exercise is that the plots that look good, they were in good condition, produced more biomass, and they had a higher growth rate. That shows that farmers are actually selecting their species for productivity, something that sounds very obvious and straightforward, but they're not conserving biodiversity as we would name it from an ecological perspective. So it makes absolutely sense that farmers thought that the grasslands were in good condition and that the quality was good, because they are managed to achieve these goals. From our perspective, we find that perceptions and evidence differ. We are concerned when a soil is losing their biological properties, the biological stability, because that exposes the land to shocks. So the land will be losing resilience. But farmers are pursuing different goals. So the metrics of what defines good and bad are completely different. The scales of assessment also differ, because they are looking for productivity. They want to feed their animals. And we are thinking about those climate shocks that are going to happen more and more in the future. When there's a drought and you have few very productive species, they will be more affected than if you have a number of species and some of them will escape the shock. So what can science do, given that scientists were looking for these objectives and farmers are looking for those objectives? We started on-farm restoration experiments where we want to find what are those combination species that are going to help us bring back those soils that have lost their lives. They have lost species and therefore they have lost their biological properties. We want to find what is the right mix that's going to deliver on giving more resilience to the grassland and also allowing the farmers to meet their own productive objectives. And the other thing we did is to start that conversation with the local universities. We have a local university as a partner in this project of mutual learning, because science is not going to serve the farmers if we don't find that intersection point. And if we don't realize that we are not talking the same language, it is unlikely that we are going to meet these objectives of climate change mitigation and conserving biodiversity. So we held a couple of courses in which actually both sides have learned. We have probably showed them how to measure things, but we have learned the local metrics of the assessment of these evolving landscapes. And finally, what did we learn? We learned that we need to generate local empirical evidence, that we come with our Western eyes to analyze systems that are different and diverse, and we don't understand. We need to generate the local empirical evidence. We need to truly engage with the farmers to seek solutions, because if we just come with our packed solutions to them, they are unlikely to succeed. And the last point is that we need to train the next generation of restoration practitioners. And I'm not thinking of a one-way training. I'm thinking that we as well need to be trained on understanding what are the solutions that are going to bring meaningful change. And that was my last slide.